G'day folks, it's Rob here, and this week I'm very pleased to be able to present to you an introduction to aquaponics, which I presented over on the Ponics YouTube channel last week. It was a part of their third annual Aquaponics Medicinal Herb Conference that they hold every year. It's pretty much all held over 2 days, and there's links to both days down in the description, as well as to Steve's Ponics YouTube channel, the Ponics website, and also to some of the courses that Steve offers, and there'll be a little discount code down there for you as well if you want to take him up on learning a little bit more about growing medicinally with aquaponics, as well as a pest control course he runs there as well. Now also too, while you're there, check out our Aquaponics Beginner's Guide. Links are down in the description as well, and there'll be a little scroller with an offer coming up through the course of this video, offering you a bit of a discount if you want to stick around and see what that code is. But that's enough spruiking on my part. Let's get into an introduction to basic aquaponics. Introduction to aquaponics. I've pretty much all figured I would start off with a what is aquaponics for you folks who really aren't familiar. Obviously, most of you guys out there who are watching this are going to be familiar with what aquaponics is. It's the merging of both aquaculture, which is the farming of fish in either wild environments in cages, pens, or tanks, and also the growing of hydroponic plants in a soilless medium, which no doubt the majority of you folks are all familiar with. Luckily enough, aquaponics has a couple of little friendly helpers that gets them to work together, and that's the bacteria. The bacteria pretty much will the driving force of aquaponics. You have a couple of different varieties. You have ammonia oxidizing ones that will oxidize the waste generated by the fish, both ammonia and ammonium, into nitrite, and then you have nitrobacter and other nitrite oxidizing bacteria that will then convert that nitrite into plant available nitrate, even though there are other forms of nitrogen that are plant available as well. All part of a happy ecosystem, and it's pretty much all the bacteria that gets the aquaculture and the hydroponics working together. The cycle is pretty basic. As you can see, you have some fish food. You feed that to the fish. The protein within that food is converted into waste ammonia and ammonium, which is excreted out of the fish's gills. And then the bacteria get to work, the nitrous ammonas and other bacteria converted to nitrite. And then again, the nitrobacter and other bacteria converted into nitrate. It's available to the plants. It's clean from the water, and it's safe for the fish to basically swim in that environment due to the low nitrate levels. When we decide to set up our aquaponic system, we pretty much will have to create our own little nitrogen cycle so we can get the fish in clean water, basically, take care of all that ammonium and ammonia that they release themselves. So what we tend to do is cycle the system. That's what people pretty much all call it, bit of a common term. So we're actually creating a nitrogen cycle, and we're doing so by adding an ammonium source. The popular ones are things like ammonium hydroxide, which is cleaning ammonia with no perfumes or surfactants or soaps in it, anything like that. Ammonium chloride, which is big in the aquarium trade. There's a couple of branded products that are based on this. You can even use things such as Charlie Carp or fish emulsion, which is made from a pest species here in Australia. And I think Maxicrop is a version of fish emulsion over in the States. And you can also use the fish feed you intend to feed the fish themselves, basically by dosing the system with the same amount you'd be feeding your fingerlings or new fish on a daily basis to create that cycle. Now, what you will need, though, is a test kit, so you can monitor the elevation of the ammonia within the system and know how the cycling is going, the cycling process. Can take anywhere up to a couple of months, depending on your climate, where you live, the heat, and also the ammonia source. But for our climate here, we're in the subtropics. You can see up there, day 1, we got an ammonia reading pretty much well straight away. Day 4, the ammonia pretty much well disappeared. That's probably because I was using some recycled medium from an earlier system. But we got a spike in the nitrite, which went up to around about, I'd say, between 0.25 and 0.5 parts per million. And we started to see a little bit of nitrate accumulate in that end test. And then day 7, the nitrite climbed higher, so did the nitrate. And by day 14, we only had trace amount of ammonia, which is something you will find in most aquaponic systems. 0 nitrite, which means those bacteria getting in there and doing their job, and elevated levels of nitrate. So pretty much all by those readings, I could tell the system was cycled. And this chart down here gives you a little bit of an idea on what goes on. You get a raise in your ammonia level until the bacteria kick in and start to oxidize the nitrite. And around about the same time, you get those nitrite oxidizing bacteria coming in and raising the nitrate level. And yeah, once you see the levels drop right down, you know your system is pretty much well cycled. And there's a couple of easy ways to kickstart the system. Like I mentioned, I had old media, which had a little bit of bacteria already on there. So I kickstarted the system that way. So if you know someone with a system already, or a healthy aquarium even, get some of that filter material or some media from their system, pop it in your grow beds, and away you go. A little bit of a kickstart of that cycling process. So that's pretty much all how you started out to look after the ammonia, the nitrite and the nitrate, so the fish can live in a friendly environment. But there's other microorganisms and biota in the systems as well. You'll find they naturally occur when you plant your seedlings in, if they've been grown in a compost mix. Quite often they will come in from the air. The addition of compost worms, which we use to chew through the leftover roots and any organic matter that has fallen on the surface of the beds, they will also have some of these microorganisms on them. Things like protozoa, nematodes, and even fungi, which I'm sure you guys have already heard about a bit, mycorrhiza, through the last 48 hours. They can occur in aquaponics as well. Sometimes they're introduced and sometimes they'll just turn up out of the blue. Most people, by the way, don't test for these sort of things, don't look for the samples, but it is possible to find them in systems. Next up, how a basic aquaponic system works. It's pretty easy, really. You've got a load of fish down in the fish tank, and they're excreting ammonia plus other solid waste out the other end. And that is being picked up by a pump of some description and delivered into a grow bed. Now, this grow bed provides the home for the bacteria. The bacteria are living on the media itself. They're being supplied food from the bacteria. They're being supplied oxygen as the bed's flood and drain, if it's a flood and drain bed, or from the well-oxygenated water in this fish tank. Don't pay attention to this fish tank. It should have air stones in it as well, but, it was a bit of a rush job. And from there, the bacteria convert the ammonia all the way through to nitrate, where it is taken up by the plants. And ultimately, that nitrate is removed from the system as we harvest it for our own consumption. So it's a pretty basic, easy cycle to follow along. It's just imperative that before we add fish to most systems, that we do set up this cycling, this nitrogen cycle, so we can look after all the ammonia and ammonium generated by the fish. Now, to make your own little backyard aquaponic system, it's pretty basic. There's all sorts of equipment you can use. Old fish tanks, loads of people use old fish tanks. A food grade suitable plastic, whether it's a concrete mixing tray, some sort of storage tote, or some sort of large tub. They're great for starting off small little aquaponic systems, either on verandas or on decks or patios, whatever, or even inside under lights. But do try and make sure that they are UV stabilized, and also that they're made from food grade plastic. And these are just a couple of examples of the sorts of things you can make from these little tanks and whatnot. Over here in the top left-hand corner, we have just a basic little tote system. It is a couple of totes, one a little bit smaller than the other, a little goldfish down the bottom there, clay balls with a bell siphon, very cheap to make. This one here was a picture sent in by Lewis. Again, a larger tote down the bottom with a bit of shade covering for the fish. And then the water is pumped up through a little canister filter at the back there. And then that overflows into a media bed, which by the looks of it has a little bit of a flood and drain style bell siphon on there. And Gurkhan here in Australia, he's basically set up a little tray over the top of his fish pond, aerated nicely through a little waterfall that overflows into the pond itself. So even ponds in the backyard can be utilised into aquaponic systems. mate Anthony runs an Australian aquaponics group. He set up this real kick-ass aquaponics system in his kitchen, basically a nice long aquarium down the bottom, and then goes straight up into a grow bed, and you might be able to see some lights up there. I think they're a Spider Farmer light, LED light, that illuminate the grow bed right there in the kitchen, right next to his fridge. And a couple of more aquarium examples, pretty basic flood and drain looking jobbies. Some are just benchtop units. Others you can actually build a nice little arrangements to go around them to get them fit into the decor. And this one from Jayandra here, also in Australia, is pretty kick-ass as well. A basic little aquarium down the wall, a little feature with some pots that run from one level down to the other, all the way back down into the fish tank. So there's many different ways you can set up these little aquaponic systems. If you just want to get your feet wet with a couple of with a little trial run with fish tanks or totes or whatever. Now, if you want to go a little bit bigger, you've got things that make it a little bit cheaper, things like the recycled drums, 50-gallon, 200-litre drums, smaller ones. That one there's about a 50-litre, so probably about a 12-gallon drum. IBC totes, generally around about 265 gallons or 1,000 litres, or even though you can get some a little bit larger. And you can find these on places like Craigslist and over here in Australia, Gumtree and places like that. I've picked up IBCs as little as $50 each, anywhere up to this black one here. It cost me about 150 each from memory, because they are UV stabilized and no light can penetrate, which just makes them a little bit easier to work with later on down the track when there's a lot of nutrient-rich water in there. A few examples of little barrel systems. This was our first aquaponic system, actually, made by barrels that were washed up through the 2011 floods we found around the place, washed them out and turned them into a couple of grow beds. And down the bottom, we had another 50-gallon, 200-litre barrel, and that hosed a host of goldfish and some yabbies, and just created a small little basic flood and drain system. Water enters in the back, and just when the bell siphons were triggered, it just flowed directly down into the base. And we found we had so much air flowing through there that we, through the splashing of water, we didn't actually have any air stones in that little jobby. Down here, we've got a little chop and flip jobby. It's a barrel. You chop the top off, flip it over, a little inlet on the left-hand side, a bell siphon on the right-hand side, and just the water cycling through. Not something I'd throw fish in, table fish as such, just little ornamental fish. And yeah, it grew us a load of herbs and greens. That one was actually cycled using urine, which you can also use as a fertilizer as well. But we cycled that one with urine before the fish went in. Took off nicely, as you can see, some very, very green looking plants there. And over here we have a submission from Chris. He did a chop and flip barrel, slightly different due to the top of the barrel that he was using. But the barrel down the bottom actually has some goldfish in it. And he was growing a couple of strawberries up the top, just in some river rock, and it grew very well for him. In fact, I think it's still growing to this day. Next, some slightly larger examples using those totes. Here, Andrew's got a little chop and flip system inside under some LED lights. Basically the same idea. You get the IBC, you chop the top section off, you set it up above the base, which becomes a fish tank, and you pop a couple of fish in there, a bell siphon in the front corner, and basically floods and drains under lights. Kim went a little bit further. She actually used, by the looks of it, the base of another IBC to create a grow bed on top of a whole IBC with a little canister filter in the corner there, which we'll see in a minute. And that basically, turns into a larger fish tank, something you could throw a few more fish in, as long as you've got enough biofiltration to look after the waste. The Steve Lee over here, he's basically made a chop and flip, clad it with some old pallet boards by the look of it, make it look a little bit more schmicko. And Teal's made up one using a whole IBC with an extra grow bed off to one side, just to utilise the amount of waste that the fish will generate, because you'll find even in a small little tote system like this, they generate more than enough waste to run probably around about 2 square metres or 18 square foot of grow bed, or especially greens, as they're not very nutrient demanding. Over here, chop and flip, just run through the steps. You basically get an IBC, chop the cage off, chop a top section off the IBC itself. You can either take out a small section, depending on what you want to do with it later, or just leave it nice and tall. I'll pop the grow bed on the top using some timber slats underneath, using the cage saved from the first chop. And you have a fish tank down the bottom, pump in one corner. I like to use bell siphons just to regulate the amount of air that goes down through the media. And then you plan it out with some plants on top and pop a couple of fish down the bottom. Pretty simple, takes an afternoon to knock up. I think this unit here cost me Australian around about $200 before I bought the clay. You can use River Rock, which is fairly cheap. The clay, I think, set me back around about $350 for that. So I brought the total up to around about $500. So if you use recycled things, you know, only comes in about a couple of $100 if you're using the suitable river rock. Now, there is a few different schools of thought when it comes to filtering these small little backyard jobbies. Some people say that you need to leave all the muck in the system because that's what the plants grow on. I think you'll find there's enough suspended nutrients just in the water itself that most plants will do fine as long as you're feeding the fish well and the tanks are well stocked. One of the reasons I like to filter is because these large root systems, as you can see, can catch a lot of muck. And as these root systems develop, those roots can entangle a lot of medium. Basically, what can happen, doesn't happen all the time, but what can happen is you can't get enough water exchange through those areas. So all these solids start to break down, and without any oxygen around them, one possibility is that the bacteria start to rob oxygen from the NO3, which is the nitrate, converting it back to NO2. You can end up with a nitrite spike, and if you haven't taken the proper precautions, like adding chloride to the system, you can end up with brown blood disease and killing the fish. Not only that, if it gets really bad, they can start to break down and you can release things like harmful chemicals like sulfur and whatnot into the system, which can also cause hassles, not only for plant growth, but also fish health. Now, I like to set up these small little basic canister filters in these chop and flip jobbies. The main reason being, I'll give you a brief explanation. This one here, we have a bit of pipe coming through the side. There's a uniseal, which is a rubber seal. You can buy them in my shop if you're in Australia. A little uniseal that allows the pipe to run through and runs vertical. So you have a drain on the outside, a vertical pipe on the inside. The water is picked up by the pump, and because the pump smashes it together, it basically breaks it up. They're very fine solids. The water enters through this hose that goes into the bottom. See me pointing to a small hole under my hand there. That's to stop the filter from siphoning back down into the pump, into the sump tank or the fish tank. If the pump is turned off, just breaks the siphon. And then over the top of that hose and then around this exit pipe, we pack a whole heap of material. I like to use shave cloth because I have a lot around. You can also use things like bird netting. I've seen people use things like bottle caps as well to capture those solids and to filter them out. Also adds a little bit of biofiltration into the system. Once it's all packed in tight, you turn the water on, and as you can see, clean water comes out the top and then down over into that fill tube. You might be able to see this little hole here. It's bubbling a bit. That's basically allowing a little bit of water to come out, but it also stops the siphoning, as I said, if the pump turns off, all that dirty water going back down the bottom. Now, this is a filter I'm about to clean. You can see in the top right-hand corner and around the drain there, the water's nice and clean. But all you need to do is pull off this top layer, and you can see the amount of crud that is captured underneath. This was after about 2 weeks of running. A couple of different layers, and it just gives you some idea of the amount of filth that these little basic filters can capture. And you might be able to see I've got a nut and tail jobby over there just so it's easily removable from the system. Turn the pump off, unscrew a simple fitting, take it out and give it a clean every week or so. Now, another basic filter that I like to use is a settling filter. There's a couple of different ones around. This one here is called a Radial flow settler. This is from our first system, 40mm pipe running into the side of the filter. And there is a stilling well in the center. The water is delivered into that stilling well, and then clean water is sent out the side. This is a larger jobby, 50-gallon drum, 200-litre drum. You can see the stilling well in the center there. I just pulled the cap off of. That has got water being delivered to it from this little line that is coming in through the fish tank. It is low enough so it can go under the edge of that stilling well, up through the top of the stilling well, and delivers water inside. Clean water again exits outside. So what happens is the water comes in at a certain velocity, just flowing rather fast. As soon as it exits that stilling well, because it's in a larger environment, the solid particulate starts to slow down, the velocity slows down, and they can settle out on the base. And that clean water again is allowed to go to the surface and out that side. And down here I have a little fines filter in the sump tank, and it just traps any of the finer solids. So these sorts of filters work best on larger systems that are multi-bed where you have a dedicated fish tank, I found. Next slide. This is what it looks like in the base of a radial flow settler after a week of feed. The fish were around about 300 grams at this point in time, which is almost 2/3-ish of a pound. And yeah, so they were getting a load of food, and this is the sort of solid particulate that you can expect. Down here I have a little drain fitting, a lot of suspended solids just because I've drained the filter down to a certain position. I like to pump them out either onto a garden bed, it's what I used to do, feed. This is actually under our lime tree. Well, what I do now is connect a pump and deliver them into a mineralization tank. This mineralization tank has air running through it, helps to mineralize those solids and makes them plant available again. I also add in carbon sources to feed the bacteria, the aerobic bacteria. And after a while, what I'll do is about a week or so, I turn it off, let the particulate settle, take off the clean water from the top, and then that, or cleanish water full of nutrients, that gets directed directly into the grow bed to give them a little bit of an extra feed, all those minerals that had been mineralized out of that solid waste. This is what they call a single loop system, mainly because the water is traveling in one loop, coming up from the pump, going into the fish tank. The water entering the fish tank, also some air stones in there, just point that out. The water is entering the fish tank, and it is displacing water out this pipe work here called a solids lifting outlet. It's basically got a T in the top, so a siphon can't occur. The water comes out, round into that radial flow settler you saw before. The solids then fall out of suspension, collect on the bottom to be taken out later. The clean water can then move out the top through a pipe and delivered directly into the grow beds, which in this case are run by bell siphons, flooding and draining, and it is then delivered into the sump tank, and that's what makes it a single loop. Water's picked up again and then taken straight out into the grow bed, into the fish tank, and the cycle just loops around. Now this is a split flow system. This system here is very similar in that it has the same basic setup. It has a sump tank, the fish tank, the settler, and some grow beds. Now, the big difference is the way the water flows. The water comes up to a point where it is split. You have one lot traveling out to the fish tank or the fish side of things, the aquaculture, and the other to the hydroponics or the plant grow side of the system. Pretty much all the same as the split flow, as the single loop, as it comes to the fish. Water comes in through the fish tank, solids are collected, and then the water is delivered back down into the sump tank. Myself and many others like to add some sort of biofiltration into that sump tank. Otherwise, basically what's going to happen is you're going to get ammonia-rich water go into the sump tank, picked up by the pump and delivered back into the fish tank. 9 times out of 10, that is going to be fine, but there's always that one occasion where you have a warmer day or the pH fluctuates a bit. The ammonium is in the presence of ammonia. It can be toxic to the fish. So I like to add some sort of biofiltration in there. If you want to learn more about that, jump onto my YouTube channel. There's other videos that explain the ammonia side of things, or buy my guide. I don't mind. I think Steve's got a link somewhere for that. And yeah, so this basically looks after that ammonia before it is pumped back into the fish tank. Not required in lightly stocked systems, but a lot of people like to push the limits and it can be a bit of an issue. So basically I like to put that in there. It can be as simple as a bit of netting in a slotted basket in the sump tank, or you can get a little bit more involved like I have with our systems, and I've set up a dedicated moving bed bioreactor. In here basically we have the same situation as a grow bed, whole heap of bacteria living on these little pizza wheels in here, and they are converting that ammonia all the way through to nitrate before it moves on anywhere else in the system. That way the fish are protected. So we basically have the fish, as I showed before. I've forgotten what I've done. Oh, here we go. We're coming back to the plant side. So that's one way the water flows. The other way, it's split off into the grow beds themselves. And here we have some valves that regulate the flow into the grow bed. They can come in handy when it comes to either isolating the grow bed So there is, if you want to do a treatment on the system, say spray for pest or whatever, using a neem oil, which can be toxic to fish in certain ratios and crustaceans if you have them in the system. You can isolate the grow beds, keep them running through the biofilter, the fish side of things, basically creating a mini aquaculture system. After 48 hours, you can then reintroduce the grow beds into the loop again, and you're not going to have any issues with a toxic buildup for the fish. So yeah, that's one reason why I like this system. It can be isolated. It also comes in handy if you're running multiple different grow techniques, say like rafts or NFT, that require a much slower flow rate. Being able to moderate that flow rate with water directly from the pump and valves just makes it a lot easier to run than with a split loop where you've got all the water coming, a single loop where you've got all the water coming through at once and you're dealing with a high velocity of water or high flow rate. And yep, after that, the water goes through the grow beds. It just goes down into the sump tank where it mingles again. I've had people say that, well, aren't you delivering a lot of nutrient-less water? You're basically dissolving the nutrients from the fish side of things in with air going back to the grow bed cycle. As Steve and all the other growers on here who have probably been talking that have used this sort of split flow system, they will tell you there is more than enough nutrients in a decently stocked system that a little bit of watering down after it's been taken out by the plants really isn't going to affect your grow whatsoever, as long as you do have that reasonable stock level and you have a lot of nutrients going through with a decent feed ratio. So yeah, I hope that's helped explain the split flow system. Generally, it takes a lot longer to explain these things, so I'm sort of rushing through. With those tanks, the IBCs, as I mentioned, they can be opaque, letting some UV light in there. Because we're dealing with a lot of nutrient in there, we can cause algal buildup on the walls. So here's a couple of examples on how we've clad them or shielded them. I've used a paint on the outside, very hard to get it to stick on there. Some people swear by sanding a little bit and then painting on. For some reason, ours stuck for about 4 or 5 years, so it worked really well. I painted the surfaces of the sump tank, the grow beds, and the fish tank. Over here, our aquaculture system looks like something that's landed on Mars. Basically used sarking from a house because it was available at the time, just wrapped it in that, and that kept the UV light out. Some of that sarking still exists to today. It's held up really well. So we're looking at around about 8 years worth of exposure there. Ben clad his in old pallets, as you saw with the chop and flip before. A couple of linked IBCs there, a couple of little grow beds on top. And yeah, they did really, really well. Actually, no, I think that's the actual lids on this incarnation. Yeah, just close it off, give them a bit of shelter. And Owen used some of that little reed landscaping material just to clad his. Looks rather nice if you're into that sort of thing. So there are ways you can shield it from the UV and also make it look a little bit nicer. As for the pumps that run the system, I like using the little magnetic drive pumps. They tend to be fairly power efficient these days. There's a couple of companies out there like JBow that are running little variable speed DC units. And yeah, I've found they work really well. One thing I would recommend is if you are running, like I have on this fish tank here, some hose work, it does pay to run a rigid solid PVC pipe as far as you can at the largest diameter the pump will allow until you're getting to your grow beds or your fish tank. You're basically going to get a better flow rate from the pump that way than running a hose work. This hose is a reinforced, it has a smooth bore, but there's just enough little indentation that it picks up bits and pieces along the way, which retards the flow slightly. As for pumping, plumbing supplies, as you can see, these are the little barb fittings that I use here in Australia. Very hard to get in the States. I'm actually going to start stocking them in the store. I've sold a few to people who are inquiring over in the States. Just makes hooking up this food grade pipe a lot easier, or hose work I should say, a lot easier and a lot cheaper in some cases than buying the PVC fittings. A couple of hints: if you are buying the PVC fittings here in Australia, there's a couple of mum and pop wholesalers online that will save you anywhere up to about 50% on components, even after shipping, when compared to certain big box stores that we all know about. When you're buying in bulk, they have a flat shipping fee and their prices are really reduced. So probably the same in the States. If you shop around, they'll be a little bit cheaper than Lowe's and that and the like. that tend to sell directly to the public. One thing I would recommend, if you can, if you've got little kids or a lot of people coming through your system, is looking for something like a valve like this Sand King valve that has removable handles. Makes it a little bit more child friendly. I have had people turn valves off on me before and cause all sorts of hassles within a system, or opening valves and having the radial flow settler run continually out to the garden. Luckily the fish were saved, but yeah, having the handles off there does make for a little bit more of a more secure system. Your basic tools for the trays are just, as you can see, general handyman tools most of us will have around, or if not, there may be a local men's shed or a tool hire, or even there's actually tool libraries in some places around that you can look up. If you look up tool library and get a couple of a loan of the free tools and whatnot, always give them a gold coin donation though if you are borrowing something. Basic things like reciprocating saws, saber saws, drills, hole saws for drilling out your bulkhead and uniseal holes, tape measures, markers, pipe cutters come in handy, utility knife, everything there is pretty basic, sort of fare for most people's garages or back shed. Flood and drain grow beds. These are one of the things that help the system run. Basically helps get a lot of oxygen into the bed for the plant roots, the biota, the bacteria, all the other life forms that you have there in the grow beds. I like to use a bell siphon. I don't know why. I've never really had the hassles with it some other people have had. If you are interested in having hassles with bell siphons, I actually have a 101 which shows you how to make them. Mine have worked for well, but loads of testimonials under the video, work for ages, loads of testimonials under the videos. And it also includes troubleshooting guides for the most common mistakes, and they are very basic and easy to fix. Another common siphon you'll see around the place is a loop siphon. I generally don't use these because the inlet is hidden by media, very hard to clean out roots and issues like that, unless you have a dedicated opening, such as like you have here with a bell siphon. And I figure, well, a bell siphon is easy to operate. It doesn't run into hassles with people moving the hose or other things occurring on the outside. So that's why I prefer them. U-siphons, they work fine. I had hassles with them after a while. They weren't initiating as well. I did find they were a little bit slower to drain. Not that that really matters, as long as you've got a decent flow rate going through the bed. So that's why I pretty much all stuck with the bell siphons. But yep, U-siphons work. A little bit hard to retrofit into existing bell siphon setups though. And the other way people irrigate their beds is via flooding and draining using timers. So you basically got a standpipe that overflows while the water is on. The timer goes off and you've got this little hole down the base here in the standpipe, and you can see the water exiting down the bottom there. That basically over time will just drain the grow bed down. Generally speaking, 15-minute on, 35-minute off is what I found worked for my flow rate. Keeping in mind though, you do need the entire volume of the fish tank in water. So if it's 265 gallons or 1,000 litre IBC, that needs to pass through the biofiltration, meaning your grow beds at least once an hour. Sorry, Bianca, I'm in the talk. And yeah, so that needs to go through to process the waste from the fish at least once an hour. So if you are flooding and draining using a timer, make sure you do have that flow rate go through the grow beds to make sure that waste is processed. The right grow bed media. The best media to use in aquaponics is inert media, something that doesn't fluctuate pH. And so you've got your expanded clay like I like to use. Blue metal or basalt is a common, road base is a common rock here in Australia. You can get fairly cheaply. That works really well, a lot heavier than the clay, or the other alternative, which is scoria or volcanic rock or expanded shale. See Rob from Bigelow Brook Farm if you're after that here on YouTube. Both of those, or these three here, are light: the clay, the scoria, volcanic rock, and the expanded shale. The blue metal and the river rocks that a lot of people use, they're rather heavy. So when you're designing your system, if you are going to use them, make sure you've got decent footings so they can take the weight if you're just setting up out on the grass. Simple test as well, if you are testing the rock to see if it is suitable, pop it in some vinegar. Vinegar is acidic. If there's any carbonate-based rock within that rock blend, it will start to give off a steady stream of bubbles. If you see that, steer clear of that rock, because over time it will bring the pH of your system up to a point where it may be hard for some elements to be taken up by the plants. and also cause you issues with protecting the fish against ammonia issues further on down the track, depending on how you run the system. Deep water culture, another way to grow your system. A lot of you guys are going to be familiar with this. Basically, you have a floating raft. The plants grow through the holes in the base of the raft into nutrient-rich water below. The basic backyard, you guys who are more experienced may have different flow rates depending on your feed rates and all whatnot. But the basic rule of thumb I give people in the backyard is you want the water within that grow bed to flow through around about once an hour at the fastest. So a fairly slow flow rate, just so those plants have a lot of access to the nutrients within that water. In that water as well, you need a load of air. Rob from Bigelow Brook Farm, he's using Infusinator Venturi technology, something you can find over on his channel to help irrigate it using excess pump flow. Other people will run loads of air stones down there every so many square foot to get enough air in there to keep things like Pythium away, but also to provide air to the roots of the plants, because they do require air. There's air pockets in soil, so we need to provide it in the water. The next one is the nutrient film technique, or NFT. It is basically a film of water that washes over a channel or a rail. The roots of the plants grow down into it. The water then exits down the end and flows back into your reservoir, be it a fish tank or the sump tank of the system. And yeah, it's just a continuous cycle, not a huge flow at all. You will see people use like the round stormwater pipe here, and they have end caps on it, and they have a little basically probably about a couple of inches or an inch and a half or 40 mil of water in the base. That's sort of technically a deep water culture. The roots are always submerged. This one here is just literally, as you can see, open end, just a film of water running down through the base. Both methods work though. Aerating the system, I like to use the little piston pumps. I have them suspended, as you can see here. Otherwise they vibrate and make a load of noise. Otherwise you can buy different variations of the magnetic pumps, and yeah, they just basically nice rubber feet. They shake around a little bit, make a little bit of noise, but I found these jobbies here actually quieter than these ones when they're suspended, and a little bit easier to do because they provide a suspension port. Another thing for smaller systems, you can get AC DC systems. This little one here runs on AC while the power is on, has an internal switch. The power goes off and goes on to some lithium batteries within the unit. So you've got about, I think it's 3 or 4 hours worth of air in there. Not great for a large, big IBC system, over 260 gallons, 1,000 litres, but for some of those smaller units, they work rather well. For those larger units, I prefer to use something that is a dedicated backup system. This is a little DC jobby, quite easy and legal to make. If you're here in Australia, we are allowed to work on the DC side of things. You just can't stuff around with the AC side. It's just made up with a little switch here. It's plugged into a power source. The power source keeps the switch open. As soon as the power goes off, the switch shuts and creates a circuit, as you can see here, that is set up on a couple of batteries and fires off your 12-volt pump. And there's plans on the Backyard Aquaponics forum. That's where I got this idea up. I think it's Chainsaw. He posted it, so take a screenshot of that and look it up if you're interested. I've also got a video that runs through it on my channel if you want to suss it out over there. Fish for the US, we have our bluegill or sunfish. I think they're the same family. Tilapia, your trout and your carp may not be, which is your koi and your goldfish, may not be legal in all states of America, same as here in Australia. So look into that before you just rush out and get them. Tilapia, great for the warm weather. Catfish, your channel and your bullhead, they're pretty much all something that you can run in most areas from memory in the States. Then for the smaller systems, you've got your ornamentals like goldfish, your guppies, your koi. Rainbow trout are a good choice for cooler areas. And there's a commercial place that's actually running salmon in the northeast from memory of the States. So there's loads. I mean, this is just a selection. There's loads of fish you can run. Just depends on whether you want something to chew on or whether you want something just ornamental wise in a smaller system, or you prefer not to partake of the flesh. In Australia, we got things like our go-to silver perch. They're good for the cooler and the warmer areas. Jade perch, they're what I run. The Barcoo grunters, they're good for warmer climates. And you've got your Asian sea bass or barramundi, which I think some places run in the States as well, commercially. A few places run jades actually over there commercially as well. Barra works really well in North Queensland, where it's nice and warm. Cooler states, you need heating, otherwise they die under 18 degrees Celsius, which is something Fahrenheit. We also have other natives like the eeled-tailed catfish or Tandanus tandanus. Then we have our introduced species like redfin, legal in New South Wales to keep these guys. They're a European perch, but they are legal in Victoria from memory. Rainbow trout again, as well as golden trout and brown trout, I think are viable here in Australia. People also use bass as well. And I think a few people use bass in the States. And again, your ornamentals like koi, not legal in all states, are legal here in Queensland. And your other carp and your goldfish and your guppies and things like that. How many fish in your system? I'll run through this really quick because we're running out of time. Basically, what you need to do is work out the total volume of your grow bed. This is just basically a rule of thumb for you beginners starting out in aquaponics. Can be tweaked down the line. There'll be a couple of people screaming in their chairs now saying, oh, you can have more. But anyway, this is the way I like to do it so you don't lose your fish. Allow for an inch or 25 mil from the top of your grow bed and 25 mil or an inch of dry media on top of your wet media to stop algal growth. And once you take off that amount from the height of the bed, you then work out the volume of your grow bed by measuring your length, your breadth, and your height. And then you use that calculation to work out your volume. Then you work out that volume either in litres or in gallons by 25 litres per fish if you're working litres, or 6.6 gallons if you're working in gallons. And that will give you the amount of media that you need to have a large enough bacterial colony to process the feed given to a fish at 500 grams into nitrate, so you're not going to end up with any issues poisoning your fish down the line. There are caveats in that, but if you're starting out and you follow those guidelines, you're not going to have a problem whatsoever. Just keeping in mind that you're looking at 500 grams of fish. So even if it's a fingerling and it grows up to 500 grams, that fingerling, you take it as being 500 grams because down the line, that's how big it's going to be. Just quickly, we're feeding the fish. I like to use a satiation method. So basically, you weigh out a given amount of fish feed. You put it in there with the fish. You basically wait until they stop eating it and just adding a little bit at a time towards the end. And then you weigh what's left over and subtract that from the original amount. And that's pretty much all. If you can work out how much that is in a cup measurement or whatever, just makes feeding the fish a lot easier. If you do it over a series of days, it gives you an average to work out on. And every month or two, if you notice they're smashing through the food really fast, just do the same procedure again, weigh it out, work out what a bit of a basic amount is, and then just throw it in. It just makes feeding the fish a lot easier. And you know the fish are getting enough nutrients to support the plant life on the hydroponics side of the system. The fingerlings, you can purchase them from a hatchery. Catching them from the wild, where legal. Some places it is legal to do that. Get excess fingerlings from friend systems if you're lucky enough to grow things like carp and tilapia. A lot of people find that they will reproduce within the systems by themselves. So you might have mates into aquaponics who may have some that they can share around with you. When you do get new fish, though, if you're adding them into an established system with fish in it already, put them in quarantine first, just with their own water, just in case they do have some sort of disease or some sort of issue, so they don't spread it to the other fish. Likewise, if you are adding fish even into a brand new system and they're small, add them into a little nursery area, because you don't want them being sucked up through the pump if you have a pump in the system, or taken out through your drain work and delivered into a grow bed. They don't like living in grow beds, I can tell you that. Put them in some sort of isolation tank. What you can see here on the right is basically a laundry basket with fly netting on the inside. I probably should have had a few holes in the bottom as well, because I did have a few solids build up and down in there, but that's enough to keep them isolated within there till they're a large enough size so they don't get sucked up and out through your drain work. Types of plants for aquaponics, the go-to are the greens, the lettuces, things like kangkong, your basils, your chards, onion greens, things like that. They absolutely thrive on just the basic nutrient load of an aquaponic system. Things like tomatoes, fruiting plants, they work really well too. You may need to supplement with a little bit of extra potassium just to help with the fruit formation and the general health of the plant because they are a little bit more nutrient demanding, the fruiting plants. Down here, you can see that we've got a bit of a combination of a few. We've got our greens, our beets at the start. Down the bottom, we've got a brassica going to flower there, and we've got some snow peas up the back there, and they all do phenomenally well in an aquaponic system. You can grow things as well, like blurry carrots. Carrots work fairly well, I've found, if you grow the shorter varieties, not the longs. I think these are the short Nance from memory. I may be wrong. And you can even grow your rooting crops, another blurred picture, sorry about that. But we grew a fantastic crop of potatoes, some of the best I've ever grown in a dual root zone style. Not the same exactly as Steve promotes, but slightly different. As you can see, I've got a pouch in the background there sitting in some clay balls. And I had a soil blend in there with certain rock mineral elements. And I had the hydroponic or aquaponic water delivered hydroponically to the base and was wicking up through a sand layer and grew awesome ginger, as you can see there, and also a great crop of spud. So I'm pretty much all sold on that method, and I'll be exploring it a lot more down the line. And that is pretty much all it. Sorry for being late, folks, and being a bit rushed. Yeah, I thought I had another hour or so, but yeah, it looks like I was got my times stuffed up. There you go, folks. I do hope that that introduction to basic aquaponics has helped you newbies out who are interested in learning a little bit more about aquaponics. Don't forget, I do have that beginner's aquaponic guide available. There'll be a link down in the description, and hopefully you caught the little discount code that came scrolling through the video. I'm also working on a series of webinars that will be on the Retrieve platform as well. So if you want notifications of when those webinars will be available, all you need to do is subscribe to the channel here, and I will mention it in the community tab as well as the weekly videos once they're ready for you guys to suss out. Many thanks to you folks who do come along and suss out these videos on a weekly basis, and a huge thanks to you folks who are supporting us on the YouTube and other supporter sites around on the interwebs. Links down in the description down below. But I will pretty much leave it there. I do hope you're all well and happy and your own gardens are booming, and I will catch you next video. Cheers all and happy growing.